Everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Come and eat. We now want to look at a very often easily passed over passage in Exodus chapter 9, and it's in verse 31. You know, I have to be honest with you, as I've been studying the Bible since I was a child, since about the second grade, a long time, so almost 50 years, every day. I have not gotten bored with studying the Bible. It is my passion. And I don't think I'm special. I don't think I'm anybody specially anointed or anything like that. I'm just a person that's fallen in love with the Word of Elohim and has devoted a lifetime to studying it every day. And now, thanks to the internet, we have this wonderful vehicle to be able to share what we have learned. And I give praise and Yah, the glory, for that blessing. Anyway, and I'd say all that to say this. I never get tired of it because I keep finding things. Things keep being presented to me. Sometimes I discover them by supernatural revelation. Sometimes I discover them through reading. I haven't read all these books, but I've read lots of them or parts of them. And I'm always like a gold seeker, searching out nuggets of truth. And when I find, and you got to dig through a lot of things sometimes to get that gold nugget. You know, here's a gold nugget. I wear one around my neck. Maybe you can see it here. This is a gold nugget I bought in Alaska. And that came out of a gold mine, or actually out of a river, and somebody probably had to dig through a lot of gold. In fact, I've got a gold pan here. I gotta get that. My office is like a museum. This office here. If somebody ever comes in here, often when people come in here, their mouths drop open. I got all kinds of crazy things in here. But this is a gold pan. This actually came out of gold country, out of Nevada and California. I don't know how old this gold pan is. It's probably at least 100 years old. It may go back to the 1800s, but it belonged to family members of mine that were born in the 1800s. And I don't know the history of it. I've actually panned gold with it and collected gold. Not much. But anyway, I found this gold pan in an old barn that belonged to a great uncle of mine. No, a great uncle. A great uncle's, I'm not sure who it belonged to, but they died in the 1960s, so they were probably born in the 1870s or 1880s, or somewhere in there, probably, or maybe even the 1860s. And I knew them as a child. And anyway, so this is what an old gold pan. I actually have a modern gold pan in storage in my shed out there, but this is what the old-timey gold pans, the new ones now have riffles in them. But somebody had to pan a lot of gold out of something like this or a sluice box to get this nugget. So anyway, again, sometimes I pull things down off the shelves. The camera, if you look on my shelf, I have things I have some things here in my museum that are over 2,000 years old. I got antiquities that go back to the time of Yeshua and before that are from the Holy Land. I've got things from World War I. My grandfather's old World War I army helmet when he fought in France. I've got. Some of you wonder what's this thing here. This is my family are mountain climbers. This is an old ice axe. I've got modern ones that I use for climbing mountains, but this sits back here in this, and this was used back probably 100 years ago, or maybe not quite that long, maybe 70, 80 years ago in mountain climbing. And my family are mountain climbers, and we got a lot of mountains around here. And I've got all kinds of crazy things around here. But anyway, some of you have maybe seen that in the back. You wonder what that is. And I actually use one of those in climbing mountains, and I've climbed a lot of mountains in my time, glaciated peaks. But the point is that with this gold nugget, you got to dig through a lot of things to pull out the nuggets, to find the treasures. And The Bible, studying the Bible is the same thing. It's the same way. You got to just pour through the Bible. You got to ask, seek, and knock, as Yeshua said. You know, see, ask, and you shall get an answer. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it will be opened up to you. So I encourage you, study the Bible. Read. We have so many Bible resources that you can get into the Bible. I mean, a few weeks ago I did a video on one of them, and I showed you, brought down some of these Bible reference books that are available that you can study. I mean, now on our smartphones, and I have an iPad, you know, you have things like eSword that you don't even need books. I mean, I could probably get rid of most of these books, and it would be I could get everything on the internet. I think I have eSword loaded on here. I guess I don't have it on my smartphone. I have it on the on my iPad, but I do have a Bible on here somewhere. You know, I can pop up, and I'm not sure where that is. Oh, there it is. You know, a Bible, and you know, and we can just get just about everything off of the internet. Here's my Bible, and it's got, you can look up words and all that kind of thing. But the point is that we have all these things at our disposal. Now, this is great as long as the internet doesn't go down, or you lose your battery power to charge your devices. So then we'll be back to reading. A lot of people read their stuff out of, don't read their stuff out of, you know, hard print anymore. They like to read this. Well, that's great as long as you got this available. But if you don't, we might be back to this. And I've never given up my literal Bible, because I make my Bible's like a coloring book. And this Bible's only, I got this in 2010. I have a whole coloring key here where if you can see in the camera, about 30 different colors, and I have a whole reference. You know, and this helps me to study the Bible. I have a wide margin, so I can make lots of notes. You know, I really get in there. I love that, and hopefully, you know, we don't get so sophisticated technologically that we forget to actually open up a book and get in there and read it and look up the words and make notes and colors in our Bible and really get into it. But anyway, all that to say is we have a wonderful little verse here that I had read over many years until it was pointed out to me about 15 or 16 years ago. And it's in Exodus 9, verse 31. It says, "Now the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was in the head and the flax was in the bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they are late crops." Now this was the aftermath of the plague of hail, the 7th plague that came upon the Egyptians. What is the significance of this passage, and why is it in here? I mean, what is the point of that? Do you think that the Bible just puts little pieces of information in the Bible for no reason at all? You know, I like I say, I've been studying the Bible daily for 50 years, or almost 15 years. I guess it was probably been about 49 years as of this year. I just rounded up to say 50. Here in a few months, it will be 50 years. But anyway, you know, I see these little details and I get excited, because here's another piece of the puzzle to help us to understand the truth of the Bible and how to walk it out. Let me just back up. Barley was a cultivated crop as a grain crop, cultivated as a grain crop in ancient Egypt as well as in Israel. In fact, if you go over to Israel, it grows like a weed. I don't know if I have any barley around here that I brought back from Israel. I don't think I do. But when I was over in Israel, there was barley growing all over the place. I mean, all the way up to the north, all the way down to the south. It just grows along the roadside like a weed, because it was an ancient crop, and it was the first crop that came ripe in the spring. It was planted in the fall, and it came ripe in the spring around Passover time. Passover and unleavened bread, and it was ripe and ready to be harvested. And some areas came ripe, other times some came later, depending on the microclimate of the area in which it was raised. And then and that came ripe during, like I say, during the time of Passover and unleavened bread. And then about you know, a month or two later, then the wheat harvest. Wheat took longer to mature, and it would came ripe during the time of Pentecost, in what we would call the late spring. So here we see that the barley was in the head. barley was cultivated as a grain crop in ancient Egypt as well as Israel. And like I say, it grows like a weed. And I've been there and seen it, and it's true. Several passages in the Bible, in the scriptures, witness to the fact that the barley was an indicator as to which month was to be the first month of the year for the Israelites. Why is this important? It's so they could determine the New Year's Day, and from that they would then calculate the biblical calendar and determine when the feasts, the biblical feasts were, the biblical holidays. So for example, in Deuteronomy 16 verse 1, we read the following: observe the month of Abib and keep the Passover. And Abib is spelled A-B-I-B. It's a Hebrew word. Some spell it A-V-I-V, because the letter betz, the second letter in the Hebrew alphabet, can be a B or a V pronounced, depending whether it's hard or soft sound. But anyway, I think most would say would agree this Abib, but it could be either way. Observe the month of the Abib and keep the Passover unto Yehovah your Elohim, for in the month of the Abib, Yehovah your Elohim brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. So the Exodus happened in the month of the Abib. What is this strange word that is that we read here, the month of the Abib? Because it does not, if we read in the English here, Exodus 9 verse 31, it says, and the flax and the barley were struck, for the barley was in the head, and the flax was in the bud. The word head there, the barley was in the head, is the Hebrew word Abib. So please note that, and we'll come back and define that word here in a moment. But please note that in our Deuteronomy 16:1 reference, it says, we read the month of the Abib. If you look in the Hebrew, you have the definite article. It's the hey prefix before the word month, which is chodesh or chadashah. I don't remember which word. It's Rosh Chodesh is the head of the month, so it'll be Chodesh, so it'll be probably Chodesh or Chadashah or whatever. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the Hebrew and read it. I don't have that in front of me. But anyway, the month of the Abib, so it's the definite article. It's a specific month when something is in the head and comes ripe. A grain crop, in other words. It's in that month you are to keep the Passover, not a month early and not a month later. So please note that the definite article the is a definite article, not the indefinite article, a month of the Abib, but the month, a specific thing. It's a difference between the house and a house. A house could be any house, but the house means a specific house, and this is referring to a specific, definite month. So it says that in the month of the Abib, the state of the barley determined the name of the specific month in the spring on Yehovah's calendar. You see, months in the Hebrew Bible, in the Hebrew calendar, always from antiquity have been determined by the first visible crescent new moon. That which can be seen is a visible sign. Genesis 1:14 talks about the sign of the sun and the moon. It's the Hebrew word ot, and it's a visible sign. Ot is a visible sign. It is not an invisible sign, like those that go after the conjunction when you can't see the sun. We call that the no moon. That which is invisible is not a visible sign. And that's what the word ot means. It's a sign. It's something you can see. And that's how the Jews, going clear back in the time of Yeshua and before, have always started their months as soon as the new moon was visible to be seen by the naked eye. So this is started the months in the biblical Hebrew calendar, and it was determined by the first visible sliver of the new moon. And we see that this was the beginning of the biblical year. If we go to Exodus 12, verse 2, just a few chapters later, it says, "This shall be your beginning of the months, shall be the first month of the year to you." So when the Israelites were leaving Egypt, this was their first month of the year. It was when the barley was in its head. It was ripe and in his head. It was in the state of Abib because, as I said, Exodus 9 verse 31, the word, and I'm reading from the New King James, when it says the barley was in the head, the word head is Abib. So the state of the barley determined which month, or determines which month is to be the first month of the biblical year. The month of the Abib is not so much the name of a month as it is a description of the month. So it's the word for Chodesh, or the word month, and it says it's a month when something is ripe. Something is in, some grain crop is in the head. Well, the wheat is not in the head. It doesn't come ripe until a month or two later. The flax wasn't in the head, because we read in Exodus 9 that the flax was still in its let's see here. The flax was still in its was in the bud, so it was not in an advanced stage. It hadn't started to fructify or to become fruit yet. But the only crop in Israel, and in fact the first crop, that along with the almonds, which is a fruit tree or a nut tree, but the only grain crop that comes ripe at that time of the year is the barley. There's no other crop. So this gives us a clue as to which crop it was that determined the beginning of the new year. So there are several places where we see the phrase, there's only 3 other places besides the Deuteronomy 16:1 where the phrase Abib is mentioned, and this would be, first one would be Exodus 13 verse 4. This day came you out in the month of the Abib. This is speaking about the Exodus. They came out. The Israelites left Egypt at the time of Passover in the month of the Abib. Exodus 13:4. Exodus 23:15, it says, you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days as I commanded thee in the time appointed of the month Abib. For in it you came out from Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty. Exodus 23:15. So that's the second reference. And the third reference, there's actually 2 references to the month of the Abib. In this final reference is found in Exodus 34 verse 18. And it says, and I quote, the feast of unleavened bread shall you keep. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread as I commanded you in the time of the month Abib. For in the month of Abib you came out from Egypt. Exodus 34 verse 18. So what? Let's put all of our information together. The barley was in the Abib state when the hail struck, the 7th plague that came down upon Egypt. This was the beginning of the new year for the Israelites. Exodus 12 verse 2. It was called the month of the Abib barley, and it was when they came out of Egypt, and it was when they kept the Passover and unleavened bread. There we have several determining factors that tell us when this month was and when the new year started. It started when the barley was Abib. It started when they came out of Egypt at Passover and at unleavened bread, and this was the beginning of the month, or the first month of the year. Now, what does the word Abib in the phrase the month of the Abib mean? Well, the Hebrew word Abib is only found 6 times in the Bible, and we've just read those 6 times. And according to the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament, which is one of the most preeminent lexical references that gets into the meanings of Hebrew words and gives you an encyclopedia of Hebrew words and how they're used in the Bible, the Theological Word Book of the Old Testament says, and I quote, this noun, the word Abib, it means ripe in the bud. This noun refers to barley that is already ripe but still soft, the grains of which are eaten either rubbed or roasted. The American Standard Version and the Revised Standard Version agree, but see Luke 2:14. The 7th plague brought ruinous hail upon Egypt's barley crop at least 2 weeks before it was fully ripened and ready for harvest. Exodus 9:31. Abib was also the early name, later Nisan, Nisan, of the first month of the Jewish calendar, which is the month of Passover. In that month, the barley came to ear, but the usual time of harvest was the second month, Iyar. According to Leviticus 2:14, the grain offering was to consist of the first fruits of Abib. So here we see that, according to the theological work of the Old Testament, the barley came ripe, the early barley came ripe in the land of Israel during the time of Passover. But because of, if you've ever been to the land of Israel, there are a lot of geographical, topographical elevations in the land of Israel. Some are up in the mountains and some are down in the valleys. For example, Jerusalem is at about 25, Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives are range between about 25 and 2,800 feet above sea level. The Judean foothills or mountains around that area are higher. And then about 20 or so miles from Jerusalem, you go down to the Jordan Valley where the Dead Sea is, and it's the lowest spot on earth at about, 1,300 feet below sea level. So we have a differential there of about almost, 3 to 4,000 feet. Actually more than 4,000 feet if you consider from the top of the Judean hills. So, and there's a lot of microclimates. So I've been in Israel, I've searched out the barley, and there's some areas where it comes ripe first, some areas where it comes ripe later, and this process of ripening, depending on the climate, can occur weeks between each other, depending on where it is. I mean, anywhere you have agricultural products, I live in an agricultural area here in the Willamette Valley, Western Oregon, and we have areas where things come ripe faster and some come ripe sooner, certain fruit trees and strawberries and things like that, depending on the season, depending on how much sun there was, depending on what the elevation is, depending on what the microclimates. Some micro areas are warmer than other areas, depending on how the winds blow. A lot of variable factors. I'm an agriculturalist. I've been in agriculture and horticulture all my life, something I know a lot about. And so I'm not speaking out of my top of my hat on this one. I'm a certified arborist and I've owned a ornamental tree and care shrub company professionally. I'm an expert for 30 some years, and I've been working in agriculture and nursery stock and livestock all my life for since I was a child, because I grew up in that environment on a farm and in a nursery. So this is something, to me that's very real, but I understand people growing up in a city or have not been around agriculture, this may be very difficult to understand. So I'm trying to make it simple. So the barley came ripe. Some places it came ripe earlier, but as theological word book of the Old Testament, it would keep coming ripe sometimes for weeks after. Just like the wheat. The wheat, sometimes the wheat would come earlier, sometimes it would come later. But the wheat never came ripe at the time of the barley. That just doesn't happen. It's too early. So this determines when the new year is. Now, you might say, well, why do we need the barley to determine when the new year is? Just, pick one of the months in the spring. Well, the question is, which month? When you see that sliver of the new moon, how do you know that's maybe not the end of the year, the 12th month? Maybe there's going to be a 13th month, because in the Hebrew calendar there can be a 13th month called an Adar Bet. How do you know you don't postpone it for a month? Well, so there's some guesswork there. That's where, when the barley comes ripe, that's when you know it comes ripe, or Abib, that's when you know that is the beginning of the new year. They needed to have the barley ripe for the wave sheaf offering during the Feast of Unleavened Bread that happened on the first day after the weekly Sabbath, during or slightly after the Feast of Unleavened Bread, so that they could offer up the wave sheaf offering there. And the priests could, on First Fruits Day, which happened usually during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. First Fruits Day was a special, what's called the wave sheaf offering, that the priests would raise up and accept, or raise up to Yehovah for acceptance, for his acceptance there in the tabernacle at the altar. And it was a thank you offering, but it was the very first harvest of barley that came ripe in the land of Israel. They would cut some, and then they would wave it up to Yehovah for his acceptance. And the reason this is so important is because, and this is a whole other discussion, this pointed forward to when Yeshua was resurrected from the grave. He was our first fruits offering, and he had to go to Father to ascend to heaven. He said, don't touch me. I haven't yet ascended to heaven. I have to be accepted to the Father. He had to go up and be accepted there at the end after he was resurrected, and be accepted to the Father as the first fruits offering. So it was a picture of Yeshua the Messiah. And of course, this is why we need this day to determine when the new moon is of the first year, so we can then calculate out 14 days from the first day of the month of the Abib. In 14 days, we celebrate Passover on the 14th day of the first month. And then on the 15th day of the first month is the first day of unleavened bread. And then calculate out from there the Feast of Tabernacle, or Pentecost. And then eventually that begins the first month, and that determines, or that is, the month of the Abib is the first month of the biblical year. It starts in the spring, not in the middle of the winter when our pagan calendars start. It starts in the beginning of the year, or the beginning of the spring when everything's coming alive. It's a picture of new life in Yeshua the Messiah, the believer coming to faith in Yeshua at his personal Passover. I'm getting ahead of the game. That's a whole other discussion about how the biblical feasts all correlate with the seasons of the year and the steps in one's salvation. And then we have the fall feasts, which happen in the fall, and that anyway, that's a whole other discussion. And the first feast of that year, or of that season, is technically not a feast, but is Yom Teruah, and that's the first day of the 7th month, and that all calculates off of the first day of the first month of the Abib. So anyway, I hope that edified you. That's why this is important, and we could talk about why we need the barley. I'm not going to get into this discussion because it was helped to align the lunar cycle, the lunar year, and the solar year. The lunar year made up of 12 lunar months. Usually, sometimes it would be 13, sometimes it might be 11 on rare instances, but it averaged out to be 12. But there's 354 days in a lunar year, and 365 and a quarter days in a solar year. So you have this 11 and a quarter day differential. And again, some of you are going to say, whoa, what's he talking about? I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into that now. I've got articles on my website. We have other teachings on this YouTube channel where you can go back and get that information. But I'm just giving to you, it was necessary to have to align the lunar cycle and the solar cycle, so that we, unlike the pagan Muslim calendar that slides back every year about 11 days, Yoval wanted to keep his feast days in the spring, because that's a picture of the redemption process starting in the spring with the new birth, coming alive out of Egypt, and the coming alive of the earth, and spiritually rebirth of the saint happening in the spring of the year. That's what that's a picture of. And he needed to keep the feast days in the spring, so that's why he had to use the Abib barley to help align the lunar calendar with the solar calendar. And so basically every 3 years you have a 13th month to make up for the 11 days that you're losing every month by every year, because of the differential between the 354 and 365 days. I'm sorry if this is confusing to you. Some of you will understand what I'm talking about and you'll get it, but I just let you know this. You can get more information if you want to go dig deeper into this subject, but the point is that it all works together. All these details in the Bible, all of this works together and all tie in to the plan of salvation and to the plan of redemption, and as laid out in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. All these little details are pieces in the puzzle, and that's why I get so excited when I talk about them, because it's like you can go in about 100 different directions at once, because everything relates to everything else. And here we're just briefly, barely scratching the surface of the biblical calendar. But I hope this gave you something to think about, and perhaps you'll want to dig into this a little bit more. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Thank you for watching, and I bless you in the name of Yeshua. Hallelujah.
Be found, call upon his name. He's near, he's near, he's near. Yeshua Hashem Be'ir Matzov Kerabu Yoto Karov Karov Yasov Rashi shovel ad Hashem, ki arbehis Yeshua Hashem behi matzo kerahu yota karo Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon his name. He is near. He is near. Yeshua Hashem behi matzot kerahu